So this generation is really characterized in all the research studies and reports and different looks at it as connected, influential, and widely untapped. Not really, a lot of people haven't really studied them or looked at them independently. And that's what Microsoft also saw as an opportunity. So in most cases, this generation, the net generation, is the largest generation ever. That's kind of growing or varying depending on country, but in the US and in Canada, it's very close to being true in Canada as well. And they're extremely technologically savvy, which probably wouldn't surprise you. And that technology time and that internet time and that computer time is actually cutting into other forms of media. It's not necessarily expanding and consuming their lives. There's a new study in Europe that showed that 46% of 15 to 24-year-olds are watching less TV and listening to less radio. And overall now, 25% of media time they spend doing anything, listening to music, listening to the radio, watching TV, that time is now spent online. And in Canada, over 2/3 of Canadians under 25 are online at home or close to home in school. And this unprecedented access is really beginning to define this generation. There's a global study that was done just a few months ago by BBDO, a global ad agency called Gen World. And they looked at about 30 or 40 different countries and the way that young people had access to information, and the fact that that access, that instant access to information, that kind of instant quench, the instability of technology and the internet to quench the thirst for knowledge, being able to type anything into Google and getting an answer within seconds, is really starting to define their identity and to kind of build a culture and a kind of sense of personality that they've created. And it won't surprise you to know that they're enthused by technology. So twice as many young people in this generation feel that technology is exciting and want to use it as much as they can. So that begins to define their interactions and their kind of persistence for being able to do many things using technology. They're also super connectors. So the way they use technology and the variety of technologies they use is pretty huge in most countries. So the majority of young people in pretty much every developed country use more than 2 types of technologies every day to communicate. And they're more than ever exposed to global culture. The fact that the internet really knows no boundaries means they're exposed to content, information, and people from other cultures and countries without it really being a big deal for them. To have friends in 5 or 6 different countries isn't a barrier, whereas years ago it was just impossible, something they couldn't even think of. And this whole idea of social networks and the hype around MySpace is really the evolution of the traditional or old-style posse or clique into a new social network. So instead of being about a school or neighborhood and people that are excluded because they're not cool and being conformist, so everyone has to have pink hair, or being about rules and boundaries, these social networks are more virtual, they're porous, they're flexible, they're about who's included. And they're just about linked individuals, things like LinkedIn, like Friendster, like Facebook, like MySpace. All these technologies are just all about connecting people, so friends of friends of friends, instead of just a closed loop of a few people who define a posse. So helping educators in the education community, especially in the US, schools are really freaking out about MySpace. Helping them understand these things are a fun part of some of the work we do. And also they want companies to care. The World Bank did a survey last year that showed that over 50% of young people globally rewarded or punished companies in the past year based on their perceived social performance. So that's a really important indicator for them. And over 80% of young people surveyed by the World Bank said they pay attention to the social behavior of companies in their country. And I think it's even more so, and the numbers are much higher in Europe. But this was a global survey, so this includes North America. And there's also global concerns around cyber citizenship and safety. In partnership with Microsoft, we ran a few summits around the US and really created dialogue and understood how young people feel about these topics. And I think part of the challenge is that they're talked to, and often the result is, turn off the computer, don't use the computer, don't use technology. And that approach really doesn't work. So trying to say, here's what to look out for, or here's the kind of language that should kind of put some red flags up in your mind when you see them in a chat room, it's the kind of way that a lot of programs are working to prepare young people. And also these new expectations. I'm sure these won't surprise you. Staying connected all the time. So that's the multiple device use. Zero tolerance for delays. So that's pretty obvious if the internet's ever down, or if a product launch is delayed, or if they can't order something from one store, if it's not in stock, instantly switch to someone else. There's not really loyalty built around that. And the whole blurring I talked about before of consumers and creators. So these people are the future employees, the future consumers, the kind of future workers. So how do you respond to those kind of needs and expectations? And one of the things we did with Microsoft over the last 2 years, and this was pretty much one of our first recommendations. I kind of had a lot of high hopes. Grade 11, going to Microsoft, first day, here's the things we need to do. We need to create an advisory board, we need to do all these things. And they said, great, you have 6 months, go research everything and prove that that's what you need to do. So it wasn't exactly I was a little over-expecting results quickly, but Microsoft worked with us and our global network to recruit an advisory board of young people from about 15 or 20 different countries. And they then took them to several countries to meet with senior executives to give them input, to give them feedback, and give them kind of reflections on new technologies they're working to develop. So engaging young people. He mentioned CIBC. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was part of a CIBC advisory board that was online and engaged young people in getting their views and perspectives on different banking products and services. So in what ways are your companies engaging young people? How many young people do you have on your board of directors or on your advisory boards? I do a lot of work even with credit unions, and most of the time there's 1 or 2 really proud people in the room that put up their hand, but it's really not mainstreamed yet. So to really truly engage and understand that generation, I think there's a lot that could be learned from more engaging them in processes. And often the co-op students and young people who do internships are given the worst possible jobs. But I've worked with a few companies that have kind of created skunkwork teams of interns and co-op students that have given them really high-level assignments, pie in the sky, what if? And they've come up with amazing results that have been used in the company. And there's one example of that at Microsoft where there was an intern that did college recruitment, and she was just fed up with the materials. She thought they were so boring, she didn't really like them at all. So the VP challenged her and said, okay, well, what if you had $1 million? How would you do it differently? She created a whole business plan, and he ended up hiring her as a full-time employee and giving her that budget to do the project. So what kind of opportunities are that for research and development and to kind of encourage that kind of innovation amongst younger employees in your companies?